This is Center Stage, putting your firm in the spotlight by highlighting business owners and other industry experts to help take your firm to the next level. Hey everyone, and welcome to Center Stage. I'm your host, John Henson, and this week we are talking about another really cool personality assessment that we've used here internally here at Spotlight Branding to better understand how each of us work, how we fit into our roles, or what roles fit certain types of people. We've had episodes in the past on this show about Enneagram and CliftonStrengths, and I encourage you to go back and check those out. But this week, we are talking about the Kolbe assessment. I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with that. And so I am joined by certified Kolbe instructor, Dominic Loffredo, this week to tell us all about it. Dom, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John. Glad to be here.
Awesome. So, for those who aren't familiar, Dom is with a group called $1 Million Solution. We've had Julie Steinbacher on the show a couple of times, and I'm sure he will tell us more about that great organization later on. But before we dive in, tell me a little bit about how you got involved in Kolbe and why you're here today.
Yeah, so the background of my job, a lot of it involves the human resources, the people side of law firms and businesses. And we've been using, our company's been using Kolbe for 15 years now, give or take. And beginning of the pandemic, right, part of my job is event planning. That slowed down. And, I wanted to, we're big on the continued learning and development. And their opportunity arose to attend a training to get Kolbe certified, since we use that in a lot in the hiring process, talent management, and development ongoing, from beginning to end. So, that's kind of where I jumped into it. It was pitched to me in a way that really resonated with human resources and just in people management as a whole. And so that's really why and when I dived in.
Awesome. And so kind of, broadly speaking, what is the Kolbe Index assessment and how does it kind of differ from other kind of like personality tests like a Myers-Briggs or a CliftonStrengths or stuff like that?
That's a great question, John. So both parts of that question actually merge really well together. So the Kolbe, unlike most personality assessments, it looks at a different part of the mind. So the foundation of the Kolbe assessment is based on the three parts of the mind, which is your cognitive, right? That's your learn, your life experiences. That's always changing, right? As you experience, learn, adapt to new things. Then the other part of your mind is the affective, right? That's your feelings and your emotions. That kind of changes with different stages of life or different priorities, right, in your life. And then the third part of your mind, which is one of the most misunderstood words in the English dictionary, is conative. I had not heard of it until I got certified, but conative is your natural instincts, right? It's the do part of your being. And so the Kolbe evaluates and assesses the doing, the conative part of your mind. So like CliftonStrengths, Myers-Briggs, DISC, there's a bunch of them. They all have their place. They can be used to help your business in a variety of ways, and really also not discrediting them in any way, but they all evaluate either the cognitive or the affective parts of your mind. So that's the biggest difference in the two. And my easiest way to kind of highlight Kolbe is the instinctual part. It defines what makes us left or right-handed. Right? Why things just click doing it this way. And yet someone else can do it a completely different way. And it's good for me to do it my way. And it's good for you to do it your way. Yeah. So the Kolbe upon that, right, and where it expands is it really helps us define, like if you're giving a task or a project, if you have the freedom to go about completing that task any way you please, the Kolbe is going to help clarify why you went about and why you solved that problem or completed that task that exact way. And it's how you, it's just your process going through that. And that's where we use it in firms with the hiring and the development.
Yeah, absolutely. And, after I took this, quiz, it was one that, like you said, it did really explain, why I do things the way I do them or how I do them, and really made a lot of sense. And then, as we kind of implemented this throughout our company, we started noticing a pattern, and we'll get into so like what the different scores mean in the categories, because there's basically you take this assessment, you answer a few questions, and then you are given four numbers based on basically four different categories or four different traits or whatever. You got fact finder, follow through, quick start, and implementer. And so it's like what, 1 through 10. And so the higher the number, the more like that trait you are, more or less, for lack of, you probably have some better language than I do on that. But, it was very interesting to see, how everyone else scored, and then to kind of look at it through that lens. It's like, oh, that's why they kind of work the way they do, or that's why they ask those questions that way, or anything like that. So let's dive in to each of these four kind of categories or sections of the Kolbe. And let's start with fact finder. What is it? What does it mean to be a fact finder, or a high fact finder versus a low fact finder, stuff like that?
That's a great question. I do have to point out my chart. So I don't know how well you
Yes.
can see this, but this is a chart everyone gets with their own personalized results. Every employee has one of these on their desk, right, to reference. So the fact finder, and I'll call that the first mode, is how you handle data, right? So it's information based, right? So going from 1 to 10, and I will point out the Kolbe actually flips their chart upside down. So usually on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 is at the bottom, 10's at the top, because 1's looked at as a poor score and 10's looked at as a great score. Kolbe's upside down. So 1 is at the top, 10's at the bottom. And they do that to disassociate with a positive negative result. And that's just because a 1 and a 10 all have their place and are equally as valuable, which will make sense here more when I explain this. But so the fact finder, people, this again evaluates how you handle information and data. So I'm an 8. I am an initiating fact finder, meaning that is my most dominating trait. So I like a lot of details. So if I'm given a project or someone asks me a question, I'm going to send them a lot of information, right? I like the research part of it. I want to make sure kind of things are fleshed out ahead of time. Which, right, that has its place. In the legal industry, you need lots of information. So a lot of law firms are heavy on fact finders because, again, legal, you got to have that quality of data and information in order to do good legal work. The opposite side of a fact finder, so like your 1s, 2s, 3s, right? They are the people who are really good at taking a big spreadsheet or just reading a big report and saying, here are the 3 most important sentences or facts to pull out of it. They can just reduce the clutter. I am not a good person for that because I'm like, oh man, how can you eliminate all this stuff? Like that's a good bit to learn from that, right? So again, that's the, my example of why a 1 and a 10 are both good to have on the team to balance one another out.
Yeah, absolutely. I know, especially for me, like I was like a 7, like, so I'm up there with you on like, I ask all these questions and, I'm trying to get all these details and, and it's interesting, working with someone who's on the opposite side of that, who, can just kind of pick things really quickly and move on, because it's, to your point, I'm sitting there like, how can you, what about this thing, or what about this thing, or did you ask this question or look at it from this angle? And so it is just really interesting how you, even just from the first mode, like you said, you start to develop and really understand how different people can work. And obviously there are things in between. I don't want to turn this into like there's 2 different types competing against each other, but yeah, so that's fact finder. What about follow through? What is that?
Yeah, so follow through mode, or the follow through mode, evaluates how you handle systems and processes, right? So along the same line, right, as fact finder, where do you want a lot of systems? Do you want to build a system, or do you want to find the shortcut, right? Again, people who can find a shortcut in I'll say like in our world, a crisis appointment, right? They got to figure out how to do this quicker. That's super valuable. But also in the legal industry, you have to have a lot of procedures. It's very system driven in a lot of law firms, right? And that's needed. So people who are on the higher end of the follow through spectrum, they're the people you want building the systems. people in the middle, those are people who maintain. They'll tweak it here or there, but they're along the mindset of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Then you have the other end of it where it's actually called resisting follow through. You're 1, 2s, and 3s, and those are people who are going to find the quickest way to do it. So that's where the follow through comes in. And I do want to point out, you kind of led into it of the two sides of the fact finder, two sides of the follow through. It applies to every mode that we're going to discuss, but that really determines how we communicate. And that's a big piece that we use it in the hiring aspect, right? So one, fleshing out what kind of candidates you need, what kind of candidates that position really is going to benefit from. And then how do we communicate to this new hire, right, on training? Because it actually needs to look different based on your Kolbe. And the communication aspect is key. I always give the example of my boss when I first started. I'm a fact finder, so I'd give her a long email when I was tasked with something, and she would say yes, or great, or good, or like, let me know what's next. That's it. And I'd be like, oh, she's upset. I had all this information in an email. No, she's just on the lower end of the fact finder, right? So she needs less details than me. She just reads the first 3, 4 bullet points, enough to enable her to make a decision, and she's good. So it's a big part in understanding each other's Kolbes of making sure we can communicate appropriately, so that I communicate to you in a way that you can learn, and vice versa.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and I want to move to this third one here, because this is, at least for me, and this is where maybe I have some different kinds of questions. The third one is quick start. And I've always seen the first 3 as being a little bit similar to each other, or at least related to each other in a way. And we'll talk about the fourth one in a minute. But for me, and tell me if you've seen something different. For me, someone who's, the 8, 9, 10, or 7, 8, 9, or whatever, as a fact finder, at least from what I can tell, or at least in my mind, you can't also be, or you are not, how do I want to say this? You're on the opposite end of the quick start. You're good with going to, and this is the third one, the quick start is the third one. Or, if you are, high end or 7, 8, 9 on the fact finder, you're also probably, or potentially even, a higher number on the follow through. Have you seen that sort of thing in that? And we'll get to that. Actually, you know what? Here we go. I'm all over the place right now. Explain quick start, and then answer my first question about, if those are kind of related, if you've seen that, or if there is some sort of correlation with that.
Yeah. So the quick start mode is how you handle risk and uncertainty, right? So what's your tolerance for risk, right? Are you a big idea person that wants to go out and create these different marketing campaigns or business plans, or it doesn't even have to be as extreme or as big as a business plan per se. But it all gauges what your risk level is, right? So the people who are initiating, who are the 7s through 10s, right? They're looked at as more creative. I wouldn't always use that term necessarily, because they're not always in creative roles, right? Because creative people think of like the graphic aspect or marketing aspect of the world, which is a lot in your industry, right? But those who are resisting quick start, so 1s, 2s, 3s, and I'm a 2, are they're focused more on stabilizing things, right? Providing stability, eliminating risk, right? So I mentioned event planning is part of it, part of my role. What risks should we take? What things have worked really well? What things have failed? What things have we heard, to test out here and there, to kind of, process of elimination to provide that stability. And now what you mentioned, John, I've seen that based on the exact position in a firm, right? So that's different based on a paralegal role, executive director or office manager, and then owner attorney role for the firms we work with. So it's not necessarily that you can't, because I can, and I've read a lot of Kolbe assessments, and I've known the people. I've tried to predict, and when you get certified, they tell you don't, because you're always going to be wrong, at least for 2 out of the 4 modes. It's one will catch you off guard. And that's what happens a lot. So what I've seen a lot in that, and again, it's really industry based, is that the business owners or attorneys that we work with, being attorneys, right, have the fact finder, right? They have that desire, that need for in-depth detail and precision. But then as a business owner, right, their tolerance for risk is a little bit higher. Now, that's not everybody across the board, obviously,
Okay.
but a lot of them tend to have, a 4 or 5 in quick start or higher typically.
Okay.
But I do know several who have, are, 8s, 7/8 in each as well. But
Well,
again,
okay.
it varies on the industry, I think,
Yeah.
is because people are drawn to what fits their MO, right? And that's what the Kolbe is your
Yeah.
MO really, and what you're about instinctively.
Yeah, and that's just so interesting to me because just like in the way that my mind works, it's like I need to have answers to a bunch of different questions to feel good about the risk that I'm going to take, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and so that's why, me, I'm higher on the fact finder and I'm lower on the quick start. And to me, like I've always seen that as kind of a relationship. But I mean, to your point, and I'm glad that you explained that, where it's like some of the more entrepreneurial minded law firm owners, they probably are a little bit more quick start because they're in that mode of growing and all that. So that's really good insight there. So then the fourth one is implementer. And this is the one that I understand the least. So tell me all about it.
Yeah, and so this is the one that is the most important to explain because it's where people can get the most confused. And I think it's simply because of the name, right? So people hear implementer like, oh, you implement things, right? And that's tied into like the follow through, right? The process, how you like processes and procedures. The implementer is actually how you handle space and tangibles, right? So it's very physical. So I am a 3, and I keep just looking at my little chart here because I'm always referencing my numbers. But
Yeah.
so I'm a 3. So the lower end of the numbers of the implementer is more envisioning, right? So in my role, and I'm actually we'll do a different one. So I've lots of family in the trades. My grandfather built bridges. So in that setting, you're going to be someone who's like, hey, here's a great opportunity. If we put in this bridge over this river, we're going to save all this time in building a road. But that person can envision that that's a need, but they are not the person to architecturally design the bridge. That's the 7, 8, 9 an implementer. Those people physically building things right from scratch or tearing them apart just to figure out how to fix it. And so a good example of this is I would call myself a car guy. Now mechanics would laugh at me for that because I only know the basics. But I grew up, changing oil and brakes and some of the basic stuff. I've done it dozens of times watching my dad and grandfather before I ever did it on my own. So the fact that I do that is a learned behavior. So that's the cognitive part, right? It's not me just taking apart. I do not go just rip apart my car and self-diagnose things, right? It's basic things that I've done and learned how to do time and time again from those who probably are initiating implementers, the 7s, 8s, and 9s. So that's the differentiating aspect there, but it's really space and tangibles. And so like the law firms we work with, there's not a huge need for that, right? The printers, there's a company that comes and fixes the printers, right? You have someone who fixes your spouting or the physical part of the building. So you don't have to worry about that. So the law firms I work with are more heavy on the fact finder follow through pieces more often than anything else, just based on what the need is for their.
No, and that makes a ton of sense because, I'm one of those people who, gets frustrated with the IKEA furniture after 15 minutes, even though I'm reading the instructions and the instructions don't make sense. And it's just, I can't do it, but I can talk about abstract ideas and, kind of talk through things and the intangible stuff a lot more. And so all of that makes a ton of sense. So how then, with all of this now, with this understanding, how can a law firm use this information to either improve their hiring process or even better understand the roles that they have or the employees that they have?
Another great question, John. So I'll start with the hiring because that's the first step, right?
Yeah.
In the hiring process, it's really important that you know what you need, right? What you're looking for. And the biggest mistake companies make when hiring is they're hiring based on the person who was previously in that role or themselves being in that role, right? So if you were previously in that role and you're hiring as a business owner or you're first starting out, you tend to hire people just like you. And that creates cloning, right? Too much of anything is a bad thing. I forget who said that, but I'm sure there's probably several people who have. But So you have to be careful of cloning and hiring people just like you. You need the diversity of strengths. The other aspect is, or if it's a new role, maybe you don't necessarily know, right? So there's another Kolbe assessment that you take, and it helps define outlines based on what you answered. You need someone who's very detailed, right? Gets a lot of data, or you need someone who's process heavy. Maybe you need someone to head up your marketing, and you want someone who's more of a quick start and has that creative mindset. So it helps us really focus on what we need for our firm and for our business, right? With a Kolbe. So that's the first part. The next part is I always like to go to the onboarding and the training aspect. And again, that goes back to what I said about the communication of making sure that how you train this person fits their Kolbe. Because again, we tend to teach how we personally learn, right? But if that person learns a different way, we need to tweak our style a little bit and how we communicate those things, how we set them up, because that either sets them up for success or it sets them up for burnout right away and overwhelm, anxiety. Because anything new right out the gate when it comes to a job is overwhelming. You're just being inundated with new information and processes that you weren't exposed to before. So that's a big piece. And then you're talking just the longevity, retention of employees. The communication is ongoing, but it's gets more into the team environment, right? Of making sure they then know their own Kolbe and then the people that they work with around them. Again, it goes with like meetings, right? So if you and I were on a meeting, just the two of us, John, us being fact finders, you said you are 7, we're going to go through a lot of information and we are more likely to run over our meeting. So if you and I start a meeting and then loop someone else who's not a fact finder in, they're gonna be like, man, they like just spent 25 of the 25 minutes of the 30-minute meeting on the first 2 things. And we have 8 more things to get through on the agenda. So it's being able to balance each other out, knowing your strengths, when to pull someone in who has a strength that's different than yours, where you're lacking, and you need their to bounce ideas off them and get things flowing. So that's a big part in just the longevity of employees. It's also helped us, and this is one that kind of blew me away when I was newer to Kolbe, where I've seen it happen just a ton of times where it's been done really well, is you have an employee who's performing really well for a while or did well from the get-go, and all of a sudden their productivity or their happiness drops. Something's off. Now that can always be a personal thing affecting them, at home outside of work. That can be addressed. But a lot of times we found that it's actually that, their Kolbe doesn't match the position that well. And maybe they need to be switched to a different department. So this one attorney we had was very detail oriented, right? Now we just automatically assume sometimes, and that's what we did with him, is all attorneys should be really detail oriented, but we realized that the department he was in did a lot of crisis work, and they need to be more quick with their processes. And he just wasn't getting things done quick enough. So we transitioned him to a department that is very not as rushed, right? They have more time, does a great job, much better fit, happier, right? Going down the road. So that's just one example, and a fairly basic one, but where we can help kind of evaluate before they get burned out and it's too late and they're already out your door, and then you have to fill the position again. Because we don't just want that turnover. We want to be able to combat that as well. Turnover is not cheap. So we want to make sure we take care of the ones that we have here and have invested in. So that's another aspect of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if someone's in a position where they are thriving and they're in the best fit for them, they're going to do that much better, and you'll see that much more benefit from their work and overall in the firm. One final question that I had for you about this is, sometimes when people take the Kolbe, they won't get results. They will get what is called in transition. We actually had someone in our office, this happened to them when they took it. What does that mean when you get that result of being in transition?
Yeah, so getting a transition result for one or multiple modes, you got a lot going on, right? A lot of the times it's you're switching a new job, you're going into a new role. I've had a couple people who just became first-time parents, like right when they were taking the Kolbe, that switched it up, just bought their first home. it's a lot of personal, but it's just things that where like your life is changing a lot right now.
Mm.
And so you have to settle for like, they recommend 3 to 6 months before you retake it. Again, it can be a facet of things, but every person I've ever had that was in transition, it's come down to one of those. There's a major like shift in their life happening right now, or there's just a lot going on simply. And so that just means you just need to give yourself some time and be able to retake it in a few months to once those things are settled down a little bit.
Got it. And so, to kind of wrap this up then, so is there kind of a set time? Because obviously this doesn't sound like something that you take once and that's your results for life. Obviously, and like you said, like as you said at the beginning, as you go through life, different experience may change how you respond to things. Is there a set amount of time or a certain interval where, like, hey, I took the Kolbe over the summer. How many years from now should I work with these results, before I maybe look at taking it again?
So that's actually a good point, John. So they actually Kolbe's just celebrated their 40th year, or just over 40 years now. But they have 10, 20, and 30-year studies where you take it, 30 years ago and you take it today. All of these studies revealed that you have, I believe it's a 94% chance or higher, 94% chance or higher, to get the same result or same category. So like if you're a 1, you're going to be a 1, 2, or 3. If you're a 6, you're going to be a 4, 5, 6, or, you get it. But so it's very stable, and that's just the instinctual part of you really doesn't change. The people that have requested retake it, or when they took it, like again, when you're taking it for a job, we always overemphasize of, listen, this does not declare if you get the job or not. This is to match up, right? Can you fit this role better? This, we've had people apply for job A and actually they take the Kolbe like, oh no, we really like them, but job B matches more. Like, let's get them over there, and that's going to be a better fit. So you have to gauge it in that way. But so it's not something necessarily where you have to retake it or necessarily should. That Kolbe actually doesn't want you to have to retake it. But the big part is your frame of mind needs to be very open. You're not answering questions to what you think should be done, because then you're going to get inaccurate results. You thought you should be very detail heavy, so you answered questions like that on the Kolbe because it was for your job, and maybe if you took it again, you're actually much lower on the scale, which again, not necessarily bad. But yeah, so that's why different assessments that evaluate the affective or the cognitive parts of your mind, they do change a lot. Like mine, I took them a lot in college. Every professor had me take a different one, but one day I was an introvert, the next day I was an extrovert, right? It depended if it was a class that I'm comfortable going up and presenting in front of the entire class, or a class that was on a topic, like anything science was not my strong suit. I did not want to have to go and talk. So I was a little bit more reserved in those settings. So it really kind of gauges there what you're evaluating.
Awesome. Yeah. So all of this has been really great. I know you cleared some things up for me. So I know that's great. So I know that means everyone out there definitely learned something as well. How do you guys at MDS use Kolbe, and how can people get in touch to learn more about what you're doing with it?
Yeah, so our process, we use it a lot in our hiring, right, for us personally, but we also do it for other firms, law firms, financial advising firms, where we help you in the hiring process, right? So whether we're recruiting for you or we're just doing the Kolbe aspect of it, but your top candidates are going to take the Kolbe, and it helps kind of evaluate again, looking at their natural strengths and matching it to the job. To kind of help you in that final decision making when you hopefully have a few good top tier candidates to select from, and there's a big aspect of how we use it. In order, getting a hold of us, you can reach out to me at our info@themilliondollarlawyer.com. The is included in that. That's a big one that some people miss sometimes. Kolbe information on our website as well, but feel free to reach out. We'd be more than happy to help you guys.
Awesome. Yep. And I'll include that email in the episode show notes. But that's going to do it. Thank you so much for continuing to listen. I hope you guys really do check out the Kolbe assessment. It really does, illuminate a lot of things that, some of these other personality assessments don't. It really does give you some really good insight into just how people attack things and execute on things and approach, how they get their work done. And so I know you guys are doing a lot of good work over there and helping a lot of firms out doing that. So I encourage everyone to go and contact Dom and $1 Million Solution to get some of that process started. But that's going to do it for us this week. Dom, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks again, John.
Thanks for listening. To learn more, go to spotlightbranding.com/centerstage.